Well, good day. This is retired Fire Chief Paul Smith, and my co-host today is retired Fire Chief Bill Lellis. And we're going to do a little piece today on firehouses in Marin and how firehouses and fire stations got their names, and a little bit of history of fire stations in the country, how we got started. And I would like to thank the Marin Fire History Group and the Marin Fire Chiefs Association for their sponsorship. We recently took a trip to Alexandria, Virginia, and colonial America started fire stations and firehouses way back in the early days of our country. We usually don't take a field trip to do our research, but we happened to be in Alexandria, and this is a great example of firehouses back in our early days of the country. And Bill and I have had a discussion, is it a firehouse or a fire station? The left-hand picture shows above the bay doors, Fairfax Firehouse, and on the right side says Kentfield Fire Station. And Wikipedia has a definition, and they call them firehouse, fire hall, fireman's hall, engine house. And basically it's a building to store firefighting apparatus and fire engines and specialized equipment.
Yeah, the San Rafael photograph is San Rafael being the first fire department, organized fire department in the county in the 1850s. This is one of their first main stations on C Street in the middle of the block. And the last time I worked in San Rafael, this was a bakery. And as you can see by the equipment, they had a pretty good array of apparatus. All horse-drawn, hose wagons, water wagons. Even to the left, you can see the chief's car. But that was the start. And then from this firehouse location, they moved up to the corner of C Street and Fifth Street. So that was that station. Okay.
And that really is the chief's buggy, isn't it?
It really is. And I think San Francisco still refers to them today as the chief's buggy. Yeah. This is a picture of the first firehouse in Larkspur. Mrs. Doherty, who was standing in the background next to the station, called it a shack. But it wasn't just a shack. The land was given to us by a Mr. Wright, the gentleman who bought and developed what is now downtown Larkspur. And if you'll notice, there's a bell above the door on the firehouse. At that time, the volunteers had one firebox. It was on the corner of Magnolia and Ward, and it was wired to this shack, and you pulled it. And in those days, there wasn't a lot of industrial sound, so that bell probably could be heard quite well around the community. They were to respond. In those days, it was either a chemical wagon or a hose wagon, and they would respond to the fire. So that was Larkspur's first station.
And out in Fairfax, they also had a shack. As you could see, the building on the left, as they call it, was their very first firehouse. And it had a hose wagon and some equipment in there. And it was on the first block of Bolinas Road. There's a city town parking lot there now, but that's where the Fairfax firehouse started in the mid-20s. The picture on the right shows their Seagrave and the men of the firehouse there. They were all men there, and they had a paid fire chief and a whole handful of volunteers. Now this one, Bill, will travel down to Southern Marin. That's Belvedere Firehouse, and Belvedere is now protected by the Tiburon Fire District. But you mentioned in your Larkspur piece with the bell outside the firehouse where they kept their hose wagon. Well, this is 1940, and they have a big air raid siren looking device on top of the roof of their fire station or their firehouse. And you see the rig parked outside. One rig's parked outside and one rig's parked inside. Looks like an International, but same thing. They had some way to call the volunteers. And the 1940s, this was the way they did it.
Yeah, that air siren came about, of course, at the start of World War II. Everyone put an air raid siren in the firehouse. Was one of the most critical central buildings in the community.
Mm-hmm.
So counts for the air raid sirens. We all had them. Yeah.
Okay, this is Mill Valley in the 1950s, and we came across this photograph. And if you take a look, they did call it the firehouse. They really did. If you take a look at everybody dressed up in their uniforms for this photograph, being part of the community and part of the fire department in Mill Valley in the 1950s was quite a deal. It was quite a position that you evoked some status in the community.
Oh, absolutely. Most volunteer fire departments in the early days had a limit of maybe 20 volunteers, and if you wanted to be a member, you had to wait for someone to move, and they were very restricted, but it was a very prestige position, and that's where the red shirt suspenders came about. They never did that in firefighting. That was for parades and to walk around the community, and people knew you were a volunteer. Very, very important in their life.
We hope to do a piece on the Corte Madera Volunteer Fire Department this next year. Very interesting history. Got a picture of the same thing as we saw in Mill Valley. There's a group of folks outside their firehouse, and this very cool picture of their Chevy Pope Hartford engine. And you and I have done some pieces on some early fire apparatus, Bill. And you take a look at this 1916. It was quite a piece of mechanical equipment. The power itself down the road, unlike the one we saw 50 years earlier in San Rafael being pulled by horses.
That's right. The neat thing about this Corte Madera firehouse is the volunteers built it, and it was used as a city hall when they built a new firehouse in Corte Madera. And just recently, this year, they tore down this station to, I think they're going to be building a brand new multi-story building, safety building in what is now Central Marin. Yeah.
And we do some pieces on fire agencies that are no longer in existence or have been absorbed by, another agency. This was a very important piece of public protection back in the 40s into the late 40s. Marin Ship. Now, Marin Ship was a facility down in now what is Sausalito and unincorporated Marin County that they built Liberty ships for World War II, and you can see how important it was to keep the community safe during the threat of bombing from the enemy.
Yeah, it was very. They had two firehouses.
Yep.
Right along Bridgeway. I mean, all the major buildings are still there. Have been there since the war. And the matter of fact, the firehouse, this building is still on Bridgeway. It used to be a record shop with kind of what we'd call in those days a hippie place, but it was a record shop, and I believe the building is still there on Bridgeway. But they had two stations, and they were modern, the best equipment money could buy, and they did have a number of fires at this facility and some sabotage during the war. So they did their job. They also somehow got a hold of San Francisco's first hand pumper. They had the first, so historically it got passed down to them. So there's images of the San Francisco's first hand pumper that was at this facility.
That's cool. That's very cool. Terra Linda Fire Department. up in northern end of San Rafael. They had a very extensive sleeper program, and I think we did a piece on Terra Linda Fire some time ago. It's in we're in firehistory.org collection, and there you go. There's firehouse. It sure was, because a lot of the volunteers slept in the firehouse, and then, like you said, Bill, it was their home, and they took a fire science classes at College of Marin, and a number of these folks went on to be paid firefighters in our communities. But there you go. That's old Terra Linda.
And that would be what station now in San Rafael? Station 6? Would that be Terra Linda's up there? Stations?
Yeah, Station 6 is the Terra Linda station now. Yeah, of course it's been changed and remodeled and replaced, since then.
Right. Tell us about this one, Bill.
This is the San Quentin Firehouse protecting the big house.
Yeah, the big house. I used to go there quite. Our fire chief in Larkspur was a good friend with the fire chief, and in those days, the fire chief was a correctional officer. He was not a professional firefighter. He was assigned the fire chief. They had 1 or 2 engines, and this working in this firehouse as a prisoner was a high. You were outside the walls. You had your own kitchen. You were served your own food, and any time we went to visit us, the inmates couldn't do enough for us, and they always wanted to be firemen once they got out. Most of them were all on probation, were let out on probation, but if you were really good, they had 18 guys, and did a nice article. I recommend people go back and look at the article we did on the female captain who ran that firehouse for a time, but it now is an office building, and the firehouse is on the other side of the prison by the west gate in an industrial setting. So, but was the firehouse in the 40s. That's
a good story. And you say all the firefighters were inmates then?
Yes, they were. The only non-inmate is and today they have professional firefighters. They have incorrect inmate firefighters, but the chief is a civilian fire chief.
Oh, cool. Very good. Back to Southern Marin, Homestead Valley, and we hope to do a piece on Southern Marin fire agencies soon. But there again, Bill, you see it really was a fire station to station the equipment, and it really was a firehouse because people lived there. And there again, you see the air raid siren on the top of the building.
Yeah, and the one thing about the Homestead Valley, just a side note on a personal matter, the fire chief was a very small individual, Mr. Kirby, and he had one hand. He lost his hand in a soaring accident, industrial accident, but he was still the fire chief, and he was only like maybe 5'8", maybe 130 pounds. But in those days, that steering wheel on a 20 or 30 American La France was really powerful, and he managed to drive those engines, Code 3, with one hand. And today we wouldn't. That's unimaginable. I mean, but I always admired him he was a great little guy, a good man. But and every time I see this image, I think about him. So just Chief Kirby.
And early Sausalito firehouses and equipment. I think we all started this way, Bill. I really do. You have a small shack, and the fire department was born out of a necessity. They had a couple of fires in town, so they formed a volunteer group. This is an old group of Sausalito firefighters with their hose cart.
Yeah.
And they eventually built a fire station, 2, as a matter of fact. And I know you have stories about how the fire station on Bridgeway, was there. I think that's the picture on the left, and they moved it tore it down eventually and moved a bigger station across the street.
Yeah, if you're in Sausalito and you're at the yacht, next to the yacht club, which is now a restaurant, there's a pier, and all there is just the skeleton of a pier. But in some photographs, there's a building next to on that pier. That was their first firehouse. It was a little better than a shack, and they kept one of their hand carts and hose carts there, and they had hand carts all over town. And right across the street from that pier is their first station. And they got a plaque on the wall tells you the story about, and then they moved to the location where the existing headquarters station is now. So we're looking at their basically their third firehouse before it was remodeled. And then they had a station up on the highway, up on the top of Sausalito.
You know, in Sausalito, we've done some stories on Sausalito, and they had some very significant fires back in their day.
Oh, they did. They lost. And there was a time, believe it or not, and I never could figure the reason. There was a time they had a volunteer fire department in the 1800s, and then all of a sudden it disbanded. Had no firehouse. They bought a steam popper from San Francisco, and they couldn't afford to pay it. They had to give it back. So they went through some turmoil in those days because they would start to charge fees for taxation for a fire department. And the community didn't want to pay taxes for fire protection. So Sausalito is the only one I know of where they disbanded and went for a while without a fire department, and then organized, and the rest is history.
Yep. Yeah. Now, you and I did a story on the Ross Fire Department, and I believe they had the very first mechanically powered fire apparatus in the county, as memory serves. And there again, you mentioned the bell you had on the Larkspur firefighters had in downtown Larkspur and Magnolia. And when we did this story behind their 1910, I think it was a Seagrave, they had a church tower, bell tower, and that's how they alerted their firefighters there was a fire in town to get to the station, because they had a big bell tower, and they'd bring the church bell tower to alert the volunteers. So I guess unless it was, Sunday morning and the bell was ringing, you reported to the station.
Yeah, that was when we did the interview with Captain Selfridge, and he told us that the fire alarm system was tied to the bell at the church. I'm just trying to imagine it would have box 32 ring out, what it must have been like. So, except around Christmas time. Yeah. Nice piece of history.
It really is.
In their firehouse, they still have the remnants of the old fire alarm system for display. And if you get a chance, before they do something with that station, you ought to stop by and see the fire alarm system, what it really looked like in those days. It'd be a stop well worth taking. Yeah.
It really is, and I believe they still have an air horn in that facility too, on the roof.
Yeah, fire chief lived on one side, and the police chief lived on the other side. That was the neat thing about it.
That was the quarters back in the Ross Fire Department, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
And here's an old shot, probably taken in the early 1950s, of Novato, and we hadn't brought many photos of Novato, although we did do a nice piece on the Novato Fire History Museum recently. But if you take a look at this, they have their apparatus on display, obviously for a photo opportunity. Looks like on the far side, Willie's Jeep, kind of a squad, and then some more modern apparatus. And there again, Bill, they had a part paid staff, part volunteer staff, and on the very top of the roof is their air raid siren. And this was the fire station that I remember back in the 60s and the 70s on Grant Avenue.
Yeah, this is the one I remember too. Before the freeway bypassed Novato, of course, 101 went right through Novato, and the firehouse was right on the main intersection, right on the corner to the left, going north. And I believe Chief Carroll Earl was the leading person who really organized and professionalized the Novato Fire Department. And we just recently did an article on their their first one of their first fire wagons, water wagons, and it was done. And just a little preview of what might be coming. We hope to do an article on their 1925 Model T, which is in perfect shape, like it just came off of Henry Ford's assembly line.
I'll tell you, yeah. And the Moreland is not shown in this picture, but that was a really fun article to do on fire apparatus. But this station in the classic, Spanish style, like a lot of the Hamilton Air Force Base airfield buildings were very classic firehouse for back in California in the day.
Yeah, if I could just make if you have kids and you want to go to one of the best museums that I've seen, the apparatus is on, of course, in the engine room floor, but their historical room on the second floor of their firehouse on Redwood Boulevard is a place to go see. And they have young people. I recommend take them there. It's a wonderful, wonderful museum. Yeah.
Great, and a great piece of Novato history.
Yes.
So we hope you've enjoyed our look back at firehouses here in Marin. And I think it's an open-ended question, Bill. Is it a firehouse or a fire station?
Since
you
spend a third of your life when you're working, that was on 24 hours off. Now, when we worked a 72-hour week, you were probably working almost half your life was in that station. And that was your home away from your house. So I would have to call it the firehouse. But I'll kind of lean that way. But in truth, every time I left the house to go there, I'd always say, I'm going to the station. And everybody knew what I meant I was doing. So, but It really is a house in a sense. It's where a lot of wonderful memories are in firehouses.
Well, we'd like to thank Marin Fire History Group for sponsoring us with the Marin Fire Chiefs Association. And we hope you've enjoyed our little piece on firehouses and fire stations here in Marin. And we'd like to thank all those that contributed their photographs or their knowledge to help us put this together for you today.
Yeah. It was a lot of fun, Paul. A lot of fun. I'm glad we did it.
Thanks, Bill. This is always fun.